What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Sixers Digest YouTube channel. My name is Sean Barnard, here with my guy Eddie here, and we have some more news in the Sixers world, talking a little about a potential new target, a Philly faithful in Kyle Lowry, what exactly went down there, as well as a little news within our own team regarding our good friend Pat Bev taking shots as he loves to do. So ready to get into all of that, but before we dive into it, I do want to make sure that you guys are smashing that subscribe button, that at this point in time, 79.8% of you guys have not subscribed to the channel just yet. We want to get to that 3,000 mark before the end of January. Got to catch up to those other digest channels, the pesky Knicks Digest and Celtics Digest running away with things right now. So we got to catch them. And there's plenty to break down with this team, plenty of excitement to talk about. And at the top of the list, we have a Kyle Lowry trade. So to start off with the trade in itself, I want to dive into here. We got some breaking news the other day that the Miami Heat are nearing a trade. Well, now they've officially completed a trade to land Terry Rozier in exchange for Kyle Lowry and some draft compensation. Before we get into the Sixers angle of things, Eddie, I will swing it to you. What were your kind of thoughts on that trade when it initially happened?
I mean, from the Sixers angle, it scares me because the Heat are getting beefed up again. The
Yep.
Heat looked like maybe they were slowing down a little, getting a little softer. It's the typical trap for them, where the regular season maybe they don't look as enticing, but just beefing up with a guy who is a playoff shot maker,
Yep.
who proved it very early in his career that he was a playoff shot maker. And now he's been hanging out a bottom dweller, getting hungrier and hungrier. That's the kind of guy Rozier is. If you watch him in those Charlotte games beyond the Sixers games, which are usually blowouts in the last few years, he is a hyper competitive guy.
Yeah.
And his late game shot making is incredible. I'm not saying he's going to be the guy late game for, they're still going to run things through Jimmy, most likely, but that is a huge option for them to have down the stretch. And I feel like that's the type of player personality who it's almost like a hibernation period when he plays on a bad team. The competitiveness in him is just building up, and that's perfect for the Heat right now, to have a guy who can just go out there and get bucket after bucket and be hyper competitive late in games.
Yeah, I do unfortunately think it's a pretty hand-in-glove fit for Rozier down in Miami. I do think that Heat team needed another creator, needed another guy that was capable of getting a bucket, that there was so much dependent on Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero. Even Duncan Robinson has been asked to do a ton this season, and Jaime Jaquez has been excellent as a rookie there. Bam Adebayo, of course, doing his thing. So this Heat team is beginning to shape up into something that scares me once again. Not a good feeling, and especially with Jimmy Butler specifically, and a lot that the Heat team in general is, they're going to kind of sit and dwell and be ready for the postseason. We saw it last year where they barely snuck in and then went on a run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. So Rozier, a proven shot maker. We've seen it here in Philadelphia front and center in some matchups with the Boston Celtics early on in his career. So that is something that scares me there. But to slide into how this directly impacts the Sixers is, of course, Kyle Lowry. So to swing into why here, we have a report pretty much immediately following the trade talking about how Kyle Lowry is expected to be a buyout for the Charlotte Hornets here, and basically saying that similar to what they do, they want to allow him the opportunity to go and land on a contender and ultimately compete for a title there. Now, why I think this is specifically notable regarding the Sixers is we have this list here that under the new CBA, a number of contenders are unable to sign him, with those teams being the Phoenix Suns, Milwaukee Bucks, and the Denver Nuggets, all teams above the apron that will allow him to sign him due to the contract that he comes with. And of course, it will be a new deal if he is bought out, but due to the cap hit that comes with him, they cannot touch that number. The Sixers still fit that bill and are a team that, of course, have been in rumors with Kyle Lowry for a couple different occasions now. Quick sidebar, but just think about how catastrophic it would have been if they'd actually traded Tyrese Maxey for Kyle Lowry, as was talked about a couple years ago. But at this point in time, obviously much different situation. What's kind of your vibe check on that initially of Kyle Lowry kind of potentially coming to the Sixers, Eddie?
Well, I think a buyout obviously is the only way he would move at all, because when you're looking at more of a distance, who on earth wants to give him $29 million for what he is right now? The
Right.
Hornets are just as disinterested in that price tag as the rest of the league. But like a lot of other contenders, the Sixers are going to want that playoff experience. We've seen it in the Eastern Conference playoffs for a decade now, and he's not the player he was a decade ago. And you'd think maybe he becomes like less explosive, but more of an accurate three-point shooter. That's not quite the case. His three-point volume is very low this year, which I was actually shocked to see. He's percentage wise pretty well, but he's only attempting 4 a game in 28 minutes a game. And so maybe the Sixers, there would be a ramp up period to him being more productive. But I feel like people are maybe slightly missing the forest for the trees when they're thinking about his previous playoff impact and then what he could do right now.
Yeah.
If the buyout deal is as cheap as possible, I'm not saying no to that. His playoff percentages, they run hot and cold. He has his memorable years and he has his off years. He only shot 24% from three the year before last in the playoffs and 31 the year before that. But then he has years where he shoots 44 from the 3-point line and, leads or helps lead the Raptors to get a ring. So, it's always going to be in the back of the head. And I think the fit is he's going to take over the Pat Bev minutes if he was to come. And I don't know. It all just depends on how cheap that buyout contract is, really. I think it could be an upgrade. If anything, he's just a handy piece to have at the end of the bench, even if he's not going to play a lot right away.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that there's a pretty legitimate chance that the Sixers appeal to Lowry specifically as a landing spot, that we know that he grew up in Philadelphia, went to Villanova, a guy that has this ingrained into him. Obviously, there's been the rumors in past seasons. And, of course, the potential to compete for a championship, that out of the teams that were just eliminated, the Sixers are probably the most legitimate chance to play minutes and contend for a title. Probably a couple Western Conference teams you can throw in that same mix if he wants to talk into it or if the money comes into play, of course. But with the ties to Philadelphia, I do think that's noteworthy. Now, I guess the question comes, you kind of brought it up there about Pat Bev, but I guess, well, before we get into the direct Pat Bev, we'll mention the Pat Bev in the news right now that following the Magic game, the belt-to-ass tour, as he loves to call it, is in full swing, and he took a little shot at Wendell Carter. So to pull up the quote here, exactly what happened was Pat Bev tweeting about the belt-to-ass tour following the game. Now, Pat Bev sent one of his reporters from the Pat Bev podcast with Roan into that Magic press conference to ask Wendell Carter what he thinks about him tweeting immediately after the game. Wendell Carter went on to kind of talk about how they're not worried about Pat Bev, that's not the reason they lost. And then Pat Bev went on the attack mode, calling that loser mentality on Wendell Carter's part, that he understands Carter led the Magic in points off the bench, but Pat Bev saying how he led the Sixers in plus-minus off the bench and led the team in blocks, and he may not be filling it up in the points department, but he impacts winning in a way that Carter doesn't. I guess before we dive into the Pat Bev versus Kyle Lowry, what's kind of your feelings on that whole interaction, Eddie?
I mean, look, I'm just shocked that Pat Beverly would use that kind of language and create such a media firestorm. Color me surprised that he would do that kind of thing. No, it's typical Pat Bev. There's really nothing to be shocked for that, and he's going to do anything he wants for his podcast. And hey, as podcasters, we get it. I wish those plus minus numbers he was bragging about were a little more brag worthy, frankly, if he's going to be doing that game. But, winners versus losers, I'll always take that if my team's the winners, if that's what it comes down to. I'm always happy to have a winning player on the team. He's been on and off as being a winning player, but we'll see. Hey, I don't know. If Lowry comes in and they split those bench minutes, then I think there's just enough aggression to outweigh the annoyances, probably.
Yeah, I got to say, I can't believe how much I love Pat Bev, that he is annoying. He's the player that you absolutely hate if he's on the other team, but I love having him in a Sixers jersey, man. And what's really sold me is the on-court minutes have been better than I expected this year, that he's shooting the ball at a legitimate high rate. The 27-point performance against the Celtics, where he was the engine of the Sixers offense on that shorthanded night, was super impressive to me. To see kind of the legs that he has left in his game, the little hook shot that he has around the rim, these were all things that I wasn't fully prepared to or expecting. That I knew that there was going to be the slap in the floor, going chest to chest, getting technicals, clapping in people's face. That was all what I was braced for, but I think there's been more substance in his play than I personally expected for Pat Bev. So honestly, I'm cool with it. I get all the attention. I get the people that get sick of it for sure. But for me, the on-court product has been better than I expected, and frankly, I think it's pertaining to winning in a way that Pat Bev is pretty correct about. So especially when he is more of a mentor role at this point in time, that he's never going to be a guy logging 35 plus minutes in a game, except when they're super shorthanded, has been the case. And I think he fits defensively next to Tyrese Maxey as well, that he's helped with a lot of this. So I've been pretty happy with the Pat Bev experience. But this brings us back to the Kyle Lowry versus Pat Bev kind of conversation. I think that they're going to be right in the mix for pretty much the exact same minutes. Pat Bev actually 2 inches bigger than Lowry. Lowry only 6 foot, even smaller. Lowry a little bit older than Pat Bev, and frankly, by the way they're playing, I would say looks significantly older than Pat Bev at this point. But I guess if you have to pick between those two, if it's down to one spot in a playoff rotation, who would you feel more comfortable with, Eddie?
In a playoff rotation, I'd pick Kyle Lowry any day of the week, especially for the scoring. I mean, look, I know the defense, Lowry's not where he once was. He
Yeah.
once was a player who could make up for his lack of size with, well, frankly, his lack of length with his width and the way he was able to shift himself in front of people and kind of be a strangely very good defensive presence despite his lack of traditional size. Now he's not quick enough to do that. He can't really play bully ball on the defensive end at 6 foot. You're just not going to do that in the NBA anymore. Pat Bev, his defense hasn't slowed down in the last few years. He still is the defensive menace that he's always been. And as you said, his shooting numbers have gotten a lot better. But I still want Lowry, even if it's streaky. I almost still want Lowry out there in the playoffs rather. And thankfully, you don't have to choose. I don't think you have to choose for, the first round of the playoffs at least, and you see how it goes. And, we even use the regular season as kind of a slow transition and see who shines better in those minutes. I don't know how many minutes they're going to throw at them together if Lowry ends up on the floor or on the team rather, because that wouldn't be a very productive guard combo. But, I think it would be an interesting dynamic, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of like the likelihood of this in my mind is pretty much directly tied to what the Sixers do in the trade market. That if a spot becomes available, both Danny Green and Kyle Lowry are probably the two top candidates. I know Danny Green's still getting work within the Sixers practice facility, and it feels there's a bit of a handshake agreement behind closed doors of if there's a spot that he will. So I would say I probably have Danny Green ahead of Lowry in that pecking order. But if they were to say do a 3-for-1 kind of trade for maybe a DeJounte Murray or something like that is a spot that I could see Lowry filling up, and frankly I would have no issue with that. And it was interesting to me to watch how the Heat used Lowry in last year's playoff run, that despite still being paid like a top contributor on the team, they really cut back his minute and maximize his impact. It's almost a little bit similar to what the Spurs are doing with Victor Wembanyama right now, except obviously vastly different ends of the pendulum in their career arc. But what they were doing with Lowry is like give him this quick 10 to 15 minutes of run for the game and leave it all on the floor during that time. And they did get some decent minutes out of him. So when you factor it in like that, if there's just one stretch of play that it can give you during the playoffs, that could still be valuable to this Sixers team.
Yeah, no, I mean, one stretch is sometimes all you need. Like one quarter, 10-minute quarter where he knocks down 3 threes. Like the thing is, Lowry has something about his game where maybe it's the high arc in his threes or something like that, but they're great momentum turners. Like Kyle Lowry hitting a pull-up 3 is a momentum shift for a team for some intangible reason of basketball that you can't define with the advanced stats. That's just people watching basketball and cheering for it. And I feel like that's just something you need. That energy is needed sometimes, and he's gonna have his negative things defensively at this advanced age, but I think he's also just like smart enough as a player to avoid those slip-ups being all too consequential. If he's going to have his downsides at this age, it's going to be athletically, and he knows how to make up for that with his basketball IQ.
Yeah, definitely. And we will see. As I mentioned, I do think this is pretty dependent on the trade market for Lowry specifically, that we will see. Those are the bigger fish in the ponds. We'll see what Daryl Morey reels in with that one, what the options of what the trade looks like, and what the roster can ultimately be constructed from there. But we do want to hear from you guys in the comments. If it comes down to Pat Bev or Kyle Lowry, what is your pick for the final playoff spot? Or are you cool with both of them, kind of in the way that I think me and Eddie both are? So make sure you drop that below. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to smash that like. And as all the fans of the Pat Bev podcast know that he says, subscribe to the pod.